A cop pulls over a routine traffic stop, just another day on the job. But when he shines his flashlight into the back seat, his heart stops cold. Because staring back at him is his own son, the one he buried 2 years ago. How is this possible? Where has his son been all this time? And who is the mysterious driver gripping the wheel like they know a secret that could destroy everything? This story will take you on a shocking journey of loss, deception, and the kind of truth that changes lives forever. Don't look away, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn wind whipped through Owen Sinclair's dark hair as he pedaled his bike down the familiar path. His worn hoodie flapped behind him like a cape, and his sketchbook pressed safely against his side, protected by the weathered backpack he'd had since 6th grade. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, making the whole world look like a watercolor painting come to life. Owen loved this time of day. Most kids his age rushed home to play video games or hang out with friends, but he preferred the quiet company of his art supplies and the old stone bridge at the edge of town. Here, he could breathe freely, away from the chaos of high school hallways and crowded cafeterias. The crunch of fallen leaves under his bike tires created a rhythm that matched his breathing, a peaceful melody that belonged only to autumn. As he approached the bridge, its weathered stones stood out against the colorful sky like an ancient guardian, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, telling stories of countless seasons gone by, each line a chapter in its history. Parking his bike against the sturdy railing, Owen found his favorite spot, a flat rock that gave him the perfect view of the river below. The water moved slowly, reflecting the sunset like mirrors scattered across its surface, creating tiny dancing lights that seemed to wink at him. He settled down and opened his sketchbook, the familiar texture of the paper under his fingers bringing instant comfort, like greeting an old friend. His pencil moved with careful strokes as he captured the scene before him. First the outline of the trees, then the delicate ripples in the water, and finally the way the light danced between the branches. Each line was deliberate, thoughtful, just like Owen himself. He didn't need words to express what he felt. His drawings said everything his quiet nature held inside, speaking volumes in gentle graphite strokes. A train whistled in the distance, its rumble growing louder as it approached, rolling through the valley like distant thunder. Owen paused his sketching, letting the steady sound wash over him. It was like clockwork, this train. Same time, same sound every day. In a world that often felt confusing and overwhelming, he found peace in such predictable things, these steady rhythms of life. A sudden gust of wind caught his pages, flipping them rapidly like shuffling cards. Owen quickly pressed his hand against the paper, but not before catching glimpses of earlier sketches. Trees, birds, clouds, all the quiet moments he'd captured here. Each page held memories of afternoons spent in peaceful solitude. The wind reminded him that time was passing, and his math homework still waited in his backpack, a responsibility he couldn't ignore forever. He sighed, looking at his unfinished sketch. The responsible thing would be to head home now, but the way the sunset reflected on the water was too perfect to leave just yet, like nature was putting on a special show just for him. 5 more minutes, he whispered to himself, adding careful shadows to the trees in his drawing, trying to capture the magic of the moment. Finally, as the sky's colors began to fade into deeper blues and purples, Owen knew he couldn't delay any longer. He carefully closed his sketchbook and slipped it into his backpack, zipping it up with practiced care, protecting his artistic treasures. That's when he heard it. A sound, soft and muffled, drifted up from beneath the bridge. Owen froze, his hand still on the zipper, fingers growing cold despite the mild evening. His heart began to pound against his ribs as he listened harder, barely daring to move. There it was again, a cry, definitely coming from under the bridge, unmistakable in the growing twilight. He stood completely still, barely breathing as his mind tried to make sense of what he was hearing, every muscle tense with uncertainty and growing concern. Owen's heart thundered in his chest as he peered over the bridge's edge. The cry came again, softer this time, like a kitten's mewl. His fingers gripped his sketchbook tighter, knuckles turning white. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The late afternoon air felt heavy with an unseen weight that made his skin prickle. Taking a deep breath, he carefully made his way down the rocky slope. Loose stones skittered beneath his sneakers, some tumbling into the shallow creek below with quiet splashes. The setting sun cast long shadows under the bridge, making it hard to see clearly. The crying grew more distinct with each step, a high-pitched, desperate sound that made his stomach twist and his hands clammy with worry. When he reached the bottom, he froze. There, nestled among crisp autumn leaves and broken twigs, was a small bundle wrapped in a thin white blanket. A hospital blanket with its telltale blue and pink stripes along the edge. Owen's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was seeing, his mind refusing to accept it at first. A baby. A tiny, newborn baby, probably no more than a day or two old. Its face was scrunched and red, little fists waving weakly in the cool air. Owen dropped to his knees beside the bundle, his hands shaking. The baby was so small, so helpless, its skin still bearing that fresh, newborn, wrinkled look. He looked around frantically, searching for anyone who might have left it here, but the area under the bridge was deserted. Only the sound of rushing water and the baby's weak cries filled the air, echoing off the concrete above them. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking. "Is anyone there? Please?" His words bounced back at him, unanswered. Nothing but the whisper of wind through dying leaves. The baby squirmed, and Owen noticed something white peeking out from the folds of the blanket. With trembling fingers, he carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper. The note was written in hurried, shaky handwriting, the pen having torn through the paper in places. "I'm so sorry, please give them a chance I never had." Owen stared at the words until they blurred. His chest felt tight, and before he could stop them, hot tears rolled down his cheeks. This wasn't an accident or a mistake. Someone had left this baby here on purpose, hoping someone would find it. The thought made his heart ache with a pain he couldn't quite understand. Wiping his face with his sleeve, Owen sniffed hard. He couldn't leave the baby here alone in the cold. The tiny thing needed help, and fast. His hands still shaking, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed 911, watching as the infant's chest rose and fell with each tiny breath. Owen's fingers trembled as he held the phone to his ear, counting each ring like heartbeats in the growing darkness. The baby's cries had gotten quieter, just tiny whimpers now, and that scared him more than the loud wailing had. His own breath caught in his throat as he shrugged off his hoodie, carefully draping it over the tiny bundle to shield it from the biting evening air. 911, what's your emergency?" A woman's steady voice came through the line, anchoring him in the moment. I found a baby," Owen stammered, his words tumbling out in a rush of panic and concern. "Under the old stone bridge on River Road. Someone left it here. There's a note and everything. Please, you have to help." "Okay, sweetheart, take a deep breath," the dispatcher said firmly but kindly, her voice carrying the calm he desperately needed. "Is the baby breathing?" Owen leaned close, his ear near the baby's face, his heart pounding. Yes, he said, listening to the soft, quick breaths that tickled his cheek. "But it's really cold out here. The temperature's dropping fast." "You're doing great. I'm sending help right now. Can you stay with the baby until they arrive?" "Of course." "I won't leave," Owen promised, his free hand gently tucking the hoodie tighter around the bundle, trying to block out the chill wind. Should I pick it up?" "If you feel comfortable, you can hold the baby close to keep it warm. Just support the head very carefully." With trembling hands, Owen gathered the bundle into his arms, cradling it like he'd seen people do on TV. The baby felt so fragile, like a bird that had fallen from its nest, its tiny body weighing almost nothing against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered to the infant, his voice catching. "You're not alone anymore. I promise." The baby's tiny fingers curled around the edge of his hoodie, the gesture so innocent and trusting that Owen felt tears prick his eyes again. His throat tightened as he looked down at the small face. How could anyone leave something so small out here alone in the cold? "Help is on the way," the dispatcher assured him, her voice still steady and reassuring in his ear. "You're being very brave. Can you tell me your name?" Owen Sinclair. Thank you, Owen. The police and ambulance are almost there. Just keep doing what you're doing. In the distance, Owen heard the first wail of sirens pierce the evening quiet. Red and blue lights began to flash through the trees, getting brighter with each passing second. His chest loosened with relief as he let out a shaky breath, the sound of approaching help breaking the evening silence. He held the baby closer, sheltering it from the strobing lights, and whispered, "See? I told you help was coming." The police car and ambulance arrived in a burst of red and blue lights, their sirens cutting through the evening quiet. The flashing lights bounced off the stone bridge, creating dancing shadows that made everything feel surreal. Owen's heart hammered in his chest as he watched a paramedic scramble down the slope toward him and the baby, medical bag swinging from one shoulder. "Step back, son," the paramedic said gently, kneeling beside the tiny bundle. The scent of antiseptic and latex gloves filled the air as she leaned in close. Owen reluctantly moved aside, his legs shaky beneath him, fingers fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. Officer Daniels approached, his notepad already in hand. He was tall, with graying temples and kind eyes that reminded Owen of his uncle. His badge caught the spinning lights, winking like a star. "I'm Officer Daniels. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Owen wrapped his arms around himself, suddenly aware of how cold it had gotten. The chill had crept through his thin sweater, raising goosebumps on his skin. "I was just drawing," he said, gesturing to his abandoned sketchbook, its pages fluttering in the evening breeze. "Then I heard crying. When I looked under the bridge, I found her. The baby." His voice cracked slightly, the weight of the moment catching in his throat. The officer nodded, pen scratching against paper. His presence was steady, calming. "And you were alone?" "Yes, sir. There was nobody else here." Owen reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the folded note. He held it for a moment, feeling strangely protective of this small piece of paper that carried such a heavy message. The paper was soft from being handled, its edges worn. "The note," Officer Daniels prompted gently. "The dispatcher mentioned you found one?" Owen slowly pulled it out, smoothing the creases before holding it out. His hand trembled slightly. "They left this with the baby." Behind them, the paramedics worked quickly, checking the baby's temperature and wrapping her in fresh, warm blankets. Their movements were practiced, efficient. "She's lucky you found her," one of them called over to Owen. "Much longer out here in this cold?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Owen's breath caught. She, a girl. Somehow knowing this made everything feel more real, more personal. He watched as they carefully lifted her tiny form, her face barely visible among the folds of the blanket. "We need to get her to the hospital," the paramedic announced, cradling the bundle close to their chest as they climbed back up the slope, each step careful and measured. Owen followed their movements, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The ambulance doors opened with a metallic groan, and he caught one last glimpse of the pink-wrapped bundle before they closed with a final-sounding click. The vehicle pulled away, its lights still flashing but siren silent now. Owen stood rooted to the spot, watching until the taillights disappeared around the bend, leaving only darkness in their wake. His hands felt strangely empty without the note, and the space around him seemed too quiet without the baby's soft sounds. The night air felt colder somehow, lonelier. Owen pushed open his front door, his whole body feeling heavy. The warmth of home wrapped around him, but it couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in his bones. From the kitchen came the familiar clink of dishes and the soft hum of his mother working. Normal sounds that felt strange after everything that had happened. The scent of lemon cleaner and fresh coffee drifted through the air, a reminder of how ordinary this day had started. He stood in the entryway, his fingers still clutching the crumpled note the police had let him keep. Something about it felt important, like a secret he wasn't ready to share. But the weight of it pressed against his palm, demanding to be known. His backpack felt like lead on his shoulders, and he let it slide to the floor with a soft thud. "Owen," his mother's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Is that you?" He took a deep breath and walked toward the sound. The kitchen lights cast a warm glow over everything, making the stainless steel sink sparkle. His mother stood there, dish towel in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Water dripped steadily from the faucet, marking time in quiet drops. The moment she saw his face, she set down the plate she was drying. "Owen? What's wrong?" Worry creased her forehead as she studied him. Her hands twisted the dish towel unconsciously, a nervous habit he'd seen 1,000 times before. His hands trembled as he pulled out the folded paper. The words felt burned into his mind. "Please give them a chance I never had." The paper was soft from being handled so much, its creases deep and worn. Slowly, he held it out to her. Ava took the note, her eyes moving across the words. Then something changed. Her whole body went still, like a statue. Her knuckles turned white against the paper, gripping it so hard Owen thought it might tear. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. The steady drip of the faucet counted out the seconds of silence. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "Lucy Davenport." Owen felt his body go rigid. The name meant nothing to him, just 2 words floating in the air between them. But his mother's face had gone pale, like she'd seen a ghost. Whatever this name meant, it shook her to her core. He watched as her free hand gripped the counter's edge for support. His heart pounded against his ribs as he watched her, searching for answers in her expression. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor. Finally, the question he'd been holding back slipped out. "Who is Lucy?" The scene hung suspended in that moment, mother and son standing in their bright kitchen, connected by a simple piece of paper that somehow changed everything. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo in the silence, marking the space between what was and what would be. Owen lay in his bed, the sheets tangled around his legs from tossing and turning. The street lamp outside cast strange shadows on his ceiling, dancing and shifting like his restless thoughts. Lucy Davenport. The name wouldn't leave him alone, echoing in his mind like a song stuck on repeat, making sleep impossible on this otherwise quiet night. His mother's reaction had been strange, more than strange. The way her face had gone pale, how her hands had trembled when she read the note. The paper had shaken so hard he'd thought she might drop it. There was a story there, one that made his stomach twist with worry, one that seemed to have opened old wounds he hadn't known existed. The old floorboards creaked under his feet as he slipped out of bed. The house felt different at night, bigger somehow, full of secrets and whispered memories. He padded down the hallway in his sock feet, careful to avoid the spots that always squeaked, moving like a shadow through the familiar space that now felt alien and mysterious. A soft glow spilled from the kitchen doorway. Owen stopped, his heart beating faster, his breath catching in his throat. Peering around the corner, he saw his mother sitting alone at the kitchen table. The note lay flat in front of her, and she stared at it like it might suddenly speak, like it contained answers to questions he couldn't even imagine. Her coffee cup sat untouched, probably cold by now, forgotten in whatever memories held her captive. "Mom?" His voice came out smaller than he meant it to, barely more than a breath in the stillness. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the paper, lost in whatever memories it held, as if she were reading something far beyond the words on the page. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking time that seemed to stand still. Owen stepped into the light. Who is Lucy Davenport? His mother finally looked up. The kitchen light cast deep shadows under her eyes, making her look older than she was, worn down by whatever weight this name carried. She pressed her fingers to her temples, rubbing slow circles as if trying to ease away a headache or perhaps the memories themselves. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "Someone I should have saved." Owen felt goosebumps rise on his arms. The kitchen suddenly felt colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed darker, more threatening. His mother's words hung in the air between them, heavy with regret and something else. Something that made him afraid to ask more questions, even though they burned in his throat like hot coals. The night seemed to press in around them, keeping its secrets close. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow that felt at odds with the heavy silence filling the room. Owen sat at the wooden table, his spoon making slow circles in his cereal bowl. The cornflakes had turned soggy, but he barely noticed. His eyes kept drifting to his mother, watching the way her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Ava cupped her coffee mug with both hands, staring into the dark liquid as if it held answers. She hadn't taken a single sip. Dark circles under her eyes revealed her sleepless night, and her usually neat hair fell in messy strands around her face. The tick of the kitchen clock seemed too loud in the quiet room, each second echoing like a hammer strike. Owen's stomach churned with questions that wouldn't stay down. He pushed his bowl away, the scrape of ceramic against wood making his mother jump slightly, sloshing coffee onto her trembling fingers. "You knew her, didn't you?" The words came out softer than he'd meant them to, almost getting lost in the hum of the refrigerator. Ava's fingers tightened around her mug until her knuckles turned white. She closed her eyes for a moment, then let out a long breath that seemed to deflate her entire body. "I tried to help her once," she admitted. Her voice was barely above a whisper, strained like it hurt to speak the words, like they'd been buried so deep that bringing them to light caused physical pain. Owen leaned forward in his chair, waiting for more, the wooden seat creaking beneath him. But his mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and she said nothing else. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap, filled with unspoken words and painful memories. "Help her how?" he pressed, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice, though his words came out sharper than intended. Ava shook her head, finally releasing her death grip on the coffee mug. "It doesn't matter." Her tone had that familiar edge to it, the one that usually meant end of discussion, sharp and final as a door slamming shut, but this time Owen couldn't accept that. His mother knew something important about the girl who'd left that baby under the bridge. She knew Lucy Davenport, knew why she might have done what she did, and she was keeping it all locked away like a secret in a box, one that he desperately needed to open. The fork in his hand felt cold and hard as his grip tightened around it, the metal biting into his palm. Fine. If his mother wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd find it himself. Some secrets couldn't stay buried forever, especially not ones that involved abandoned babies and girls who disappeared into the night. The afternoon sky hung low and gray as Owen pedaled his bike through the quiet streets of downtown. Fallen leaves crunched under his tires, and a cold breeze made him pull his hoodie tighter around his shoulders. His backpack felt heavy with homework he should be doing, but his mind was focused on only one thing: finding Lucy Davenport. The weight of his mission pressed harder than any textbook could. Thompson's General Store stood on the corner of Main Street, its faded green awning fluttering in the wind. The store windows displayed the same arrangement of seasonal decorations and local notices they'd shown for weeks. A bell chimed as Owen pushed open the door, warm air rushing to meet his cold cheeks. The familiar smell of coffee and penny candy filled his nose, mixing with the dusty scent of old wooden shelves. Mr. Thompson looked up from his crossword puzzle, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. His weathered hands rested on the wooden counter that had been there as long as Owen could remember. The afternoon sun streaming through the window highlighted the deep creases in his kind face. "Well, if it isn't young Owen Sinclair," Mr. Thompson said, setting his pencil down. "Shouldn't you be headed home? Your mother will be wondering where you are." Owen shifted from foot to foot, gathering his courage. His sneakers squeaked against the worn linoleum floor. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, I wanted to ask you something." He took a deep breath. "Do you know anyone named Lucy Davenport?" The old man's friendly smile faded slightly. He removed his glasses, folding them carefully before answering. "Lucy Davenport?" He narrowed his eyes, thinking. There was a homeless girl, been hanging around the old train station. Poor thing looked like she'd been through rough times. Owen's stomach tightened. His heart began to race as he gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. "When?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The afternoon suddenly felt colder despite the store's warmth. "Last few months or so," Mr. Thompson said, rubbing his chin. "Young thing. Kept to herself mostly. Would come in sometimes for a bottle of water or a sandwich." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Haven't seen her around lately, come to think of it. started worrying about her when the weather turned cold. Owen's fingers drummed against the counter as he processed this information. A homeless girl at the train station. It had to be her. It couldn't be a coincidence. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," Owen said quickly, already backing toward the door. His heart pounded with newfound purpose. The bell chimed again as he pushed outside into the chilly air. His bike waited against the storefront, and Owen gripped the handlebars, his mind racing. He had a lead now. The old train station wasn't far, and maybe someone there would know more about Lucy Davenport. Hope flickered in his chest like a tiny flame. The old train station loomed ahead, its weathered brick walls casting long shadows in the fading sunlight. Owen's legs burned from pedaling so fast, but he barely noticed. His breath came in quick puffs as he coasted to a stop near the entrance, the old chains on his bike rattling against the metal frame. The place felt frozen in time, like a photograph yellowed with age. Wooden benches, their paint peeling and surfaces tagged with spray paint in faded blues and reds, lined the empty platform. A vending machine buzzed in the corner, its display dark and cracked, a testament to years of neglect. The air smelled of rust and old leaves, with hints of diesel fuel that never quite faded from the concrete. Owen wheeled his bike slowly along the platform, his footsteps echoing against the concrete like tiny drum beats in the silence. His heart thumped so loud he was sure anyone could hear it, the sound filling his ears. That's when he saw her. At the far end of the platform, partially hidden in shadow beneath the sagging roof, sat a girl. She was hunched against the wall, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to disappear. Her dark coat looked too thin for the October chill, the fabric worn at the elbows, and her brown hair fell in tangles around her face, hiding her features. Lucy Davenport. Owen's mouth went dry, and his palms grew sweaty against the rubber hand grips. He took a few careful steps forward, trying to look braver than he felt, though his knees trembled slightly. Lucy's head snapped up at his approach, her whole body going rigid like a startled deer. Her eyes, dark and distrustful, darted from his face to his bike and back again, searching for threats. "Go away," she muttered, the words falling between them like stones. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in a while, scratchy from cold and disuse. Despite her hard tone, Owen could hear the exhaustion underneath, the weight of something heavy pressing down on her. He gripped the handlebars of his bike tighter, his knuckles turning white as he gathered his courage. His voice came out smaller than he wanted, but clear enough in the empty station. "I know about the baby." Lucy's face transformed instantly like a door slamming shut. The wariness in her expression hardened into something fierce and defensive, a wall built of fear and anger. She pushed herself to her feet, her movements stiff from sitting in the cold, her shoes scraping against the concrete. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly, turning her back to him, but her shoulders were too tense to make the lie convincing. The old train station looked different in the afternoon light, more desolate somehow, with shadows stretching long across the weathered platform. Owen pedaled slower this time, his backpack heavy with homework he was choosing to ignore, the weight of unfinished assignments less pressing than the mission that drew him here. The October wind whipped around him, sending leaves skittering across the cracked concrete platform, their rustle a lonely sound in the empty space. His heart sank when he didn't see Lucy in her usual spot, the disappointment hitting harder than he'd expected. The bench where she'd sat yesterday was empty, just another piece of forgotten furniture in this abandoned place, its peeling paint telling stories of better days. Paper cups and old newspapers tumbled past, dancing in the wind like urban tumbleweeds. Owen pulled his sketchbook from his backpack, hands trembling slightly as he tore out the page he'd worked on all night, each careful crease a reminder of the hours he'd spent getting it just right. He'd captured every detail he could remember about the baby, her tiny fists, the way her face had scrunched up, how small and fragile she'd looked wrapped in that thin hospital blanket. He'd even added soft colors, trying to show the pink of her cheeks and the darkness of her eyes, hoping somehow the image might bridge the gap between mother and child. The paper felt heavy in his hands as he walked to Lucy's bench, weighted with more than just graphite and hope. Carefully, he placed the sketch down, weighing it with a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. The drawing fluttered in the breeze like a trapped butterfly fighting against its anchor. He turned to leave, shoulders slumping with disappointment, his footsteps echoing in the empty station. Maybe she was gone for good. Maybe Dash. "Why do you care?" Lucy's voice cut through the wind, sharp as broken glass, startling him from his thoughts. But underneath that sharpness, Owen heard something else, a tremor, a crack in her armor that betrayed her vulnerability. He turned to face her. She stood in the shadows of a concrete pillar, arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding herself together. Her dark hair whipped around her face, and her eyes were red-rimmed and suspicious, telling the story of sleepless nights and endless tears. Owen met her gaze steadily, unflinching in the face of her anger. "Because she deserves better," he said quietly, the simple truth of it hanging in the air between them. Lucy flinched at his words, taking half a step backward as if he'd struck her, her carefully constructed walls trembling under the weight of his gentle honesty. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of silverware against plates. Outside, streetlights flickered on one by one as evening settled over their small town. Owen pushed his peas around his plate, making little green trails through the leftover gravy. His mind was elsewhere, at the train station, with Lucy, with the baby who still didn't have a name. Ava watched him from across the table, her own food barely touched. She could see the weight of secrets in the slump of his shoulders, in the way his forehead creased with worry. It reminded her so much of herself at his age, carrying burdens too heavy for young shoulders. The ceiling fan whirred softly overhead, its gentle rhythm filling the silence between them. Owen's fork scraped against his plate one last time, before he set it down with a quiet determination that made Ava's heart skip a beat. "Lucy's at the train station," he said simply, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a physical blow, making her fingers tighten around her water glass. Of course Lucy would end up there. It had always been her escape, even years ago. Some things never changed. "You found her?" Ava's voice was barely more than a whisper, though she already knew the answer. She could see it in Owen's eyes, in the way he held himself like he was carrying something fragile and precious, the truth about Lucy Davenport. Owen nodded, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. "She's not doing well." The words hung heavy in the air between them, full of unspoken worry and fear. Ava looked away, her fingers moving to her temples in a gesture Owen recognized, something she did when the past came knocking too loudly. "I tried to help her once," she murmured, more to herself than to Owen. Her voice carried years of regret, of what-ifs and if-onlys. But it wasn't enough. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, more confined, as if the walls were pressing in with all the weight of untold stories. The dishes in the sink, the homework on the counter, the ordinary trappings of their life, everything seemed to fade away, leaving only this moment, this confession. Owen leaned forward in his chair, his dinner completely forgotten now. His eyes were intense, searching his mother's face for answers to questions he hadn't even formed yet. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Ava sighed deeply, closing her eyes as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "It's not an easy story," she warned, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking time as mother and son sat across from each other, poised on the edge of truth. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, heavy with the weight of secrets about to be revealed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the train platform as Owen made his way toward the station. His footsteps echoed against the cracked concrete, matching the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The old building loomed ahead, its weathered bricks telling stories of better days, when trains still rumbled through regularly, and the waiting room buzzed with life. Today felt different. Lucy was already there, perched on the same bench where he'd left his first sketch. She wore the same thin coat, but today her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, revealing the sharp angles of her face. Her eyes tracked his approach, wary but not hostile. "You're persistent," she muttered as he settled beside her, leaving enough space between them to respect her boundaries. The words carried less bite than before, tinged with something that might have been curiosity. Owen unzipped his backpack slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The familiar weight of his sketchbook was reassuring in his hands. He could feel Lucy watching him, her body tense but not turning away. "I drew something else," he said quietly, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for. His fingers traced the edge of the paper before carefully tearing it free. The sketch showed Lucy as he'd seen her yesterday, not the hard exterior she tried to project, but something deeper. In simple pencil strokes, he'd captured her sitting on the bench, one knee pulled up to her chest. Her face was turned slightly away, but there was a softness in her profile, a vulnerability in the way her hair fell across her cheek. Most importantly, he'd drawn the spark of strength he saw beneath her pain, in the set of her jaw, the straight line of her shoulders. Lucy's breath caught as she took the paper with trembling fingers. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her eyes moving over every detail. Something flickered across her face: surprise, pain, recognition. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "This isn't—" she started, then stopped. Her finger traced the line of her own jaw in the drawing. "This isn't how I look. It's how I see you," Owen said simply, watching as she continued to study the sketch. The wind rustled through the platform, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. A train whistle sounded far away, but Lucy didn't flinch at the sound like she usually did. She kept staring at the drawing, her fingers running along the edges as if trying to understand how this version of herself could exist on paper. For the first time since he'd found her, she didn't tell him to leave. The silence between them felt different now, less like a wall and more like a bridge slowly being built. Her hands trembled slightly as they held the sketch, but she made no move to give it back or tear it up. Owen sat quietly beside her, watching the play of emotions across her face. He saw the moment her carefully constructed mask cracked just slightly, saw it in the way her shoulders softened, in how her fingers gentled on the paper instead of gripping it tight. The late afternoon light slanted across the platform, painting everything in warm gold. Lucy's knuckles were white around the edges of the paper, but her touch remained careful, as if the sketch might disappear if she held it too tightly. Owen waited, giving her the space to find her voice, to decide what this moment meant. The October wind whipped across the train platform, sending dead leaves skittering across the cracked concrete. Owen spotted Lucy right away, sitting on her usual bench. Her thin jacket offered little protection against the chill, but she didn't seem to notice the cold. Her attention was fixed on the piece of paper in her hands, the sketch he'd given her yesterday. This time, when his footsteps echoed across the platform, she didn't flinch or turn away. Her fingers traced the pencil lines of her own face, studying the way he'd captured the slight furrow between her brows, the defensive set of her jaw, but also the hint of softness in her eyes that she tried so hard to hide. Owen sat down beside her, leaving the same careful space between them that he always did. The metal bench was cold beneath him, and he tucked his hands into his hoodie pockets. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The distant sound of traffic filled the silence, along with the occasional cry of a bird overhead. "Why are you doing this?" Lucy finally asked. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like she was trying to find the trap in his kindness. She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes on the sketch. Owen felt his heart speed up. This was the first time she'd really tried to talk to him, to understand. He chose his words carefully, knowing how easily she could shut down again. "Because I think you still have a choice." Lucy let out a laugh that held no humor, just pain and disbelief. "A choice?" Her fingers tightened on the paper, creating small creases. "You really think I can just walk in there and take her back?" The words came out bitter and defensive, but underneath, Owen heard something else. Longing, maybe. Or fear. "I think maybe you want to," he said softly, watching her face for any reaction. He saw her jaw clench, saw the way she swallowed hard before looking away. Lucy's fingers moved restlessly over the edges of the paper, smoothing out the wrinkles she'd just created. The sketch trembled slightly in her hands. Her shoulders hunched forward as if she was trying to make herself smaller to disappear. "You don't understand," she muttered, shaking her head. "It's not that simple. I can't just—" She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Owen stayed quiet, letting her work through her thoughts. He'd learned that pushing too hard only made her retreat further into herself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the platform, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, a lonely, echoing cry. Lucy sighed heavily, carefully folding the sketch along its creases. She tucked it into her jacket pocket, her movements deliberate and gentle, like she was handling something precious. "You don't get it, kid," she muttered, but there was less bite in her words than usual. She didn't tell him to leave, though. Instead, she sat there staring at the empty tracks stretching into the distance, her hand resting protectively over the pocket where she'd stored his drawing. The silence between them felt different now, less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Rain drummed against Owen's bedroom window, creating a steady rhythm that usually helped him sleep, but this morning it only made him restless. He tossed and turned, thinking about Lucy and wondering if she was staying dry somewhere. Finally giving up on sleep, he pulled on his rain jacket and grabbed his bike. The streets were empty, puddles reflecting the gray sky above. Owen pedaled harder, his shoes already soaked through. When he reached the train station, his heart sank. Lucy's bench sat empty, water collecting in the worn wooden slats. He walked the length of the platform twice, checking every corner and shadow, but found nothing, not even the sketch he'd given her. "Lucy?" he called out, his voice echoing off the station walls. Only the patter of rain answered back. Panic crept into his chest, making his breathing shallow. She wouldn't just leave, would she? Not after yesterday, when she'd finally started talking to him. He hopped back on his bike, tires splashing through puddles as he rode toward downtown. The shelter on Pine Street was his first stop. Through the foggy windows, he could see people huddled inside, seeking refuge from the rain, but none of them were Lucy. He tried the soup kitchen next, then the library where homeless people sometimes went to stay warm. Nothing. Owen's clothes were completely soaked now, his hair plastered to his forehead. He checked 3 different alleyways, earning strange looks from people hurrying past with umbrellas. But Lucy was nowhere to be found. Defeated and shivering, he finally turned toward home. His mom was in the kitchen when he walked in, water dripping onto the floor. "Owen, where have you been? You're soaked." Ava rushed to grab a towel. "Lucy's gone," he said, his voice cracking. "I checked everywhere, the station, the shelters, everywhere I could think of. She just disappeared." Ava's face changed, a shadow passing over it. She wrapped the towel around his shoulders and guided him to sit at the kitchen table. "Lucy disappears when she gets scared," she said quietly, her voice heavy with old memories. "What do you mean?" Owen asked, watching his mother's face carefully. Ava sighed, sitting down across from him. "It's what she does. When things get too real, too close to something she's afraid of, she runs. She's been doing it since she was younger than you." Owen clutched the towel tighter. "But why?" I thought she was starting to trust me." "Maybe that's exactly why she ran," Ava said gently. "Trust is scary when you're not used to it." Owen got up and walked to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. His reflection stared back at him, worried and tired. Had he pushed too hard? Said too much about choices and second chances? The rain continued to fall outside, washing away any trace of where Lucy might have gone. Owen pressed his forehead against the cool window pane, his breath fogging the glass. The sketch he'd given her, the conversations they'd shared, the tiny bits of trust she'd started to show. Had it all been too much, too fast? The evening air had grown cold, and dark clouds threatened more rain as Owen approached the train station. His heart had been heavy all day, worried that Lucy might have disappeared for good. But there she was, huddled against the wall, her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. Relief flooded through him. He didn't rush over or call out. Something told him to move slowly, carefully, like approaching a frightened animal. Instead, he quietly made his way to her spot and sat down a few feet away, giving her space. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. The distant rumble of trains and the whisper of wind filled the air. Lucy's fingers played with a loose thread on her sleeve, her eyes fixed on something far away. Owen noticed she still had his sketch tucked into her jacket pocket, its edge just visible. Minutes ticked by. A train whistled in the distance, and somewhere a car horn honked. Owen pulled out his sketchbook but didn't open it, just held it in his lap, waiting. Finally, Lucy's voice broke through the quiet, barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be a mother." Her words carried the weight of every fear and doubt she'd been carrying. Her shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make herself smaller. Owen turned to look at her, really look at her. He saw past the defensive anger and the walls she'd built. He saw someone young and scared, but also strong, stronger than she knew. "You already are one," he said simply, his voice gentle but firm. Lucy let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she quickly looked away, but not before Owen caught the flash of longing in them. Her fingers clutched at her jacket right where the sketch was tucked away. "A mother doesn't—" she started, then swallowed hard. "A mother doesn't leave their baby under a bridge." "No," Owen agreed quietly, "but a mother makes sure their baby is found somewhere safe. A mother writes a note asking for their baby to have a chance." He paused, watching her face. "A mother keeps coming back to this train station to talk to some kid with a sketchbook because deep down, she wants to know her baby is okay." Lucy's breath hitched. A tear slipped down her cheek and she wiped it away roughly with the heel of her hand. Her walls were crumbling, and for the first time, she didn't seem to be fighting to keep them up. "You don't understand," she whispered, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "It's not that simple. I can't just—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Owen stayed quiet, letting her work through her thoughts. He watched as she pulled out his sketch, looking at it with trembling fingers. In the drawing, she looked stronger, more certain, the way Owen saw her, not the way she saw herself. Lucy shook her head again, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You make it sound so simple," she said, her voice catching on the words. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Owen sat at the table, his hands balled into tight fists. The weight of everything he'd seen, Lucy's thin frame, her haunted eyes, the way she clutched that sketch like it was her last connection to her baby, pressed down on him. He couldn't keep this to himself anymore. "Lucy's not okay," he said finally, his voice cracking slightly. The words hung in the air between him and his mother. Ava stopped washing dishes, her back stiffening. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes narrowed as she studied his face. "You've been seeing her?" Owen swallowed hard but didn't look away. "She's been at the train station," he admitted. His fingers unclenched, then clenched again. "She's scared, Mom. Really scared." The dish towel dropped to the counter as Ava sighed deeply, pressing her fingers against her temples. The kitchen light cast shadows across her face, making her look older, more tired. She paced a few steps, then stopped, her hand gripping the back of a chair. "I should have known," she muttered, more to herself than to Owen. "The way you've been acting. Of course you found her." Owen watched his mother carefully. He'd expected anger or disappointment, but instead, he saw something else in her eyes. Determination. Like she'd made a decision she'd been putting off for too long. Suddenly, Ava straightened up. She walked to the key hook by the door and grabbed her car keys, the metal jingling in the quiet kitchen. Owen's eyes widened. "Wait, where are we going?" His heart started beating faster as his mother pulled on her jacket. Ava turned to look at him, her face set with purpose. "To find Lucy." The simple statement hit Owen like a physical force. After all his secret visits, all his careful attempts to help Lucy, his mother was just going to go get her. Just like that. But Owen stumbled over his words. It's dark out, and she might not want... Owen, Ava cut him off gently. You were right to tell me. You've done more than anyone should expect from a 12-year-old, but now it's time for me to step up. She grabbed a thick blanket from the living room couch. Lucy needs more than just someone to talk to. She needs real help. Owen stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. His mother was right. He'd done what he could, but Lucy needed more. She needed someone who could actually help her, really help her, not just listen and draw pictures. Come on, Ava said, holding the door open. Let's go find her. Together. Owen followed his mother out into the night, hope blooming in his chest for the first time since he'd found that tiny bundle under the bridge. Maybe this was what Lucy needed all along. Not just him, but someone who understood what it meant to be a mother. Someone who could show her the way forward. The car door creaked as he climbed in and Ava started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed softly in the darkness, and Owen could see the same determination he felt reflected in his mother's face. They were going to find Lucy, and this time she wouldn't have to face her fears alone. The streetlights cast long shadows as Ava's car moved through the quiet town. Her knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and the only sound was the soft hum of the engine. Owen sat rigid in the passenger seat, his heart thumping against his ribs as he scanned the darkened streets. She might run when she sees us, Owen whispered, breaking the heavy silence. Ava nodded, her jaw tight. I know. She always runs when she's scared. The train station emerged from the darkness, its weathered wooden platform looking even more abandoned at night. The broken vending machine cast a sickly glow across empty benches. Owen's chest tightened when he saw no sign of Lucy in her usual spot. She's gone, he said, his voice cracking with disappointment. Ava pulled the car to a slow stop, her eyes searching the shadows. Not necessarily. Look harder. Owen pressed his face against the cool window glass, desperately scanning the area. The station lights flickered, and that's when he saw it. A slight movement in the alley just beyond the platform. A figure huddled against the brick wall, wrapped in what looked like an old coat. There, Owen pointed, his breath fogging the window. By the alley. Ava carefully turned the car, letting the headlights sweep across the area. Lucy's face appeared in the beam for just a moment before she shrank back, like a startled animal. Even from this distance, Owen could see her body tense, ready to bolt. Wait here, Ava said, but Owen was already opening his door. The night air hit him with a blast of cold as he stepped out. Lucy's eyes darted between Owen and the car, calculating her escape route. Her shoulders hunched forward, and she took a small step backward. Lucy, wait, Owen started, but Ava's car door opened, cutting him off. His mother's footsteps were steady on the concrete as she approached. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard, but far enough not to crowd Lucy. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm strength Owen remembered from when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. Lucy, it's time to come with us. Lucy's breath came out in visible puffs in the cold air. She pressed herself against the wall, her fingers gripping the brick behind her. I can't, she whispered, but she didn't run. Yes, you can, Ava said firmly. And you will. Owen watched the silent battle playing out between them. Lucy's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too, a desperate kind of hope she seemed afraid to acknowledge. Why? Lucy's voice cracked. Why would you help me? Because everyone deserves a second chance, Ava replied, even when they don't believe they do. Lucy's legs trembled slightly. She looked at Owen, then back at Ava. The fight seemed to drain from her body all at once, leaving her looking smaller and younger than before. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. I don't have anywhere else to go. The morning sunlight filtered through the hallway window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Owen blinked away sleep as the sound of quiet footsteps pulled him from his dreams. He pushed back his covers and padded to his bedroom door, his bare feet silent against the cool floorboards. In the hallway, he found Lucy. She stood like a statue at the entrance to the guest room, her thin frame rigid with uncertainty. Her clothes, the same ones she'd been wearing at the train station, looked out of place against the warm, cream-colored walls of their home. The guest room was simple but welcoming. A double bed with fresh sheets sat beneath a window with gauzy curtains that danced in the morning breeze. A wooden dresser stood against one wall, its surface dust-free and waiting. Everything was clean, organized, peaceful, worlds away from the cold concrete of the train station platform. Lucy's hands hung at her sides, fingers twitching slightly as if they didn't know what to do with themselves. She made no move to enter the room, just stood there staring at the neatly made bed with its soft blue comforter and plump pillows. Owen watched as she slowly raised one hand toward the doorframe. Her fingers hovered there, trembling slightly, never quite touching the painted wood. It was like she thought the whole thing might disappear if she reached out to touch it. The floorboards creaked behind them, and Owen turned to see his mother approaching. Ava carried a stack of fresh towels, her face gentle but careful, like she was trying not to startle a wounded animal. "It's yours if you want it," Ava said softly, holding out the towels. Lucy didn't move to take them. She kept staring into the room, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant chirping of birds outside. Finally, Lucy's voice came out barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "I don't know how to be here." The words hung in the air, heavy with all the things she wasn't saying. "I don't know how to accept help. I don't know how to trust this. I don't know how to believe I deserve this." Ava stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Then let's figure it out together." Owen watched Lucy's face, seeing the struggle play across it. Her eyes darted from the bed to the window to the dresser, like she was trying to memorize it all while simultaneously preparing for it to be taken away. The morning light caught the tears gathering in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. Her arms wrapped around herself, a gesture Owen had seen her make many times at the train station, like she was trying to hold herself together. Lucy's feet shifted slightly, her worn sneakers a stark contrast to the clean carpet of the guest room. She looked so young in that moment, younger than her 18 years, and yet somehow older too, like someone who had seen too much too soon. The house creaked and settled around them, familiar sounds that Owen barely noticed anymore, but that made Lucy jump slightly. A car passed by outside, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal morning sounds that probably felt alien to someone who had been sleeping rough for so long. Finally, Lucy took a small step forward. Just one step, but it seemed to cost her everything. Her foot crossed the threshold into the room, and she let out a shaky breath, like she'd been holding it without realizing. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden table. Lucy sat hunched over her plate, using her fork to push a piece of chicken back and forth. She hadn't taken a single bite since Ava had served lunch 15 minutes ago. Owen watched from his seat, noticing how Lucy's shoulders curved inward, making herself smaller. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the refrigerator and the quiet scraping of Lucy's fork against the plate. Ava stood at the sink, washing dishes with slow, deliberate movements. Her back was turned, but Owen could see the tension in her posture. She was thinking hard about something. He could tell by the way she kept washing the same plate over and over. Finally, Ava turned off the water and dried her hands on a dish towel. She pulled out a chair across from Lucy, the legs scraping softly against the floor. Lucy didn't look up, just kept moving the food around her plate. "I knew your mother," Ava said quietly. The fork in Lucy's hand stopped moving. Her entire body went rigid, like a deer caught in headlights. Owen watched as her knuckles turned white from gripping the edge of the table. Her breathing became shallow and quick. Ava's voice remained gentle but steady. "She wasn't like you." She folded her hands on the table, choosing her next words carefully. She never wanted to be saved." Lucy's hands curled into tight fists, her nails digging into her palms. The muscle in her jaw twitched. "She never wanted me either," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen glanced at his mother, seeing the pain flash across her face. He wanted to say something, anything, to make Lucy feel better, but the words stuck in his throat. How do you comfort someone whose own mother didn't want them? Ava leaned forward slightly, her eyes soft with understanding. That's not your fault, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Lucy's face crumpled for just a moment before she caught herself. She pressed her lips together in a tight line, fighting to keep control. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them back furiously. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Owen could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of Lucy's pain filling the room. She sat perfectly still, like a statue carved from grief and abandonment. The fork clattered against the plate as Lucy suddenly pushed it away. The sound was jarring in the quiet kitchen. Without a word, she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Her movements were jerky, almost desperate, as she turned and walked quickly out of the kitchen. Owen watched her go, feeling helpless. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, followed by the soft click of the guest room door closing. The kitchen felt emptier without her there. The half-eaten food on her plate, a stark reminder of all the things left unsaid. Ava sighed deeply, rubbing her temples with tired fingers. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, indifferent to the heavy emotions that hung in the air. The rain tapped against the window in a gentle rhythm as Owen sat cross-legged on his bed, his sketchbook balanced on his knee. His pencil moved in quick, light strokes across the paper as he tried to capture the way Lucy had looked that morning, standing frozen in the guest room doorway, her face a mix of fear and longing. A sudden gasp cut through the quiet house. Owen's pencil froze mid-stroke. Another gasp, this one more desperate, echoed from down the hall. His heart jumped into his throat as he dropped his sketchbook and scrambled off the bed. The sound led him to the guest room, where he found Lucy crumpled on the floor beside the bed. Her body was curled tight, like she was trying to make herself disappear. Her fingers clutched at her shirt, knuckles white with tension. Each breath came in sharp, painful gasps. Owen stood in the doorway, his own chest tightening with fear. He'd never seen anyone like this before. Lucy's eyes were squeezed shut, her face pale and twisted in panic. She looked like she was drowning on dry land. "Lucy?" His voice came out small and shaky. She didn't seem to hear him. Footsteps approached behind him, and then Ava was there, moving past him with quiet purpose. She knelt beside Lucy, close but not touching her. "Lucy," Ava said, her voice steady and gentle. "You're safe. Just breathe with me." Lucy shook her head violently, her whole body trembling. Tears leaked from her closed eyes. "I've got you," Ava continued, keeping her tone even and calm. "Inhale, hold it, let it go. That's all you need to focus on right now." Owen watched, amazed at how his mother seemed to know exactly what to do. Her presence filled the room with a steady warmth, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "Breathe in with me," Ava instructed softly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Now out. Slowly. Lucy's breathing was still ragged, but she was trying to follow along. Her fingers loosened their death grip on her shirt. "That's it," Ava encouraged. "Again. In through your nose. Hold. Out through your mouth." Owen stood rooted to the spot, watching as his mother guided Lucy through each breath. Slowly, the desperate gasping eased. Lucy's shoulders began to relax, though her body still trembled. "You're doing great," Ava murmured. "Keep breathing, you're safe here." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Lucy's breathing steadied. She slumped against the wall, exhausted. Her face was tear-stained, and her hair stuck to her damp cheeks. Ava reached out slowly and placed a gentle hand on Lucy's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. Lucy didn't pull away from the touch. She sat there, eyes still closed, taking shaky but steady breaths. The rain continued its quiet pattern against the window, filling the silence with its gentle rhythm. The house creaked softly in the darkness as Owen lay in bed, his mind racing. The memory of Lucy's panic attack kept replaying, her desperate gasps, the way her whole body had trembled, How his mom had known exactly what to do. He couldn't shake the image of Lucy curled up on the floor looking so small and broken. Sleep felt impossible. With a quiet sigh, he reached over and clicked on his bedside lamp. The warm light cast soft shadows across his room as he grabbed his sketchbook from the nightstand. The familiar weight of it in his hands brought some comfort. His pencil hovered over the blank page for a moment before he began to draw. Instead of capturing Lucy as she was now, scared and uncertain, he started sketching her as he believed she could be. Strong shoulders instead of hunched ones. Her chin lifted slightly, not ducked down in shame. Her eyes clear and steady, not darting away in fear. As he worked, adding subtle details, he thought about how his mother had helped Lucy through her panic attack. There had been such gentleness in Ava's voice, such patience. He tried to capture that same kind of strength in his drawing, not the loud, showy kind, but the quiet strength that comes from within. The scratch of pencil on paper filled the silence as he carefully shaded the areas around her eyes, making them shine with something that looked like hope. He drew her hair falling softly around her face instead of hiding behind it. Little by little, the Lucy on his page transformed into someone who looked ready to face the world. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Owen looked up to find Lucy standing in his doorway, her figure half hidden in shadow. She wore the oversized sweater his mom had given her, sleeves pulled down over her hands. "Can't sleep either?" he asked quietly. She shook her head but didn't retreat. Instead, she lingered there, as if unsure whether to step forward or back away. The silence between them felt delicate, like a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. Owen looked down at his sketch, then back at Lucy. Without saying anything else, he carefully tore the page from his sketchbook. The soft ripping sound seemed loud in the quiet room. He held out the drawing toward her. Lucy hesitated, then took a few steps into his room. Her movements were cautious, like a deer ready to bolt at any sudden motion. When she reached for the paper, her fingers trembled slightly. She stared at the drawing for a long moment. Owen watched her face, trying to read her expression in the dim light. Her eyes moved over every detail, taking in this version of herself, this Lucy who stood tall and unafraid. Her throat worked as she swallowed, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The way her fingers traced the lines of the drawing, how she held it so carefully as if it might disappear. That said enough. Without a word, Lucy turned and left his room, taking the sketch with her. Her footsteps were whispers soft on the carpet as she disappeared down the dark hallway. Owen sat there for a while longer, his empty sketchbook open on his lap. He knew the drawing wasn't just a picture, it was a message. A way of saying what words couldn't quite express. That he saw her, really saw her, not just as she was now, but as she could be. That maybe, if she could see herself the way he did, she might find the strength to become that person. Lucy's fingers gripped the cold porcelain of the bathroom sink as morning light filtered through the small window. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, a stranger with hollow eyes and sharp angles where there used to be softness. Dark circles painted shadows beneath her eyes, and her unwashed hair hung in tangles around her face. The sketch Owen had given her last night lay on the counter, its edges already worn from how many times she'd held it, studied it, wondered about it. She picked it up with trembling fingers, holding it next to her face in the mirror. The Lucy in the drawing stood tall, her eyes clear and determined. Owen had captured something in her that she couldn't see in herself, a quiet strength, a hint of dignity. His pencil strokes had given her purpose, had shaped her into someone who looked like she belonged somewhere. Her actual reflection told a different story. Pale skin, bitten nails, clothes that hung loose on her frame. Everything about her screamed of someone who had been running for too long, someone who had forgotten how to stay still. She touched her cheek, watching her reflection do the same. When had she become this person? This ghost who couldn't even recognize herself anymore? The girl in Owen's drawing seemed impossible, like a dream of someone she could never be. Her throat tightened as she looked between the sketch and her reflection. The difference was almost cruel. Not because Owen had drawn her wrong, but because he had drawn her right. He had somehow seen past all the dirt and fear and desperation to something underneath, something she used to be, or maybe something she could become. But standing here in this clean, bright bathroom that belonged to people who had their lives together, she felt more lost than ever. The simple things around her, the neat stack of towels, the matching soap dispenser, the carefully arranged items in the medicine cabinet. They all spoke of stability, of knowing how to live in one place. She didn't know how to fit into this world of ordinary routines and steady foundations. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Lucy?" Ava's voice came through, gentle but concerned. "You okay?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Was she okay? She stared at her reflection, at the girl who had left her baby under a bridge, who had spent weeks sleeping in abandoned buildings, who couldn't even remember what okay felt like. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. How could she explain that she didn't know how to answer that question? That she didn't know if she'd ever been okay? "Lucy?" Ava called again, her voice a little more worried now. Lucy's hands shook as she set the sketch down. The face in the mirror blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She blinked them back hard, angry at herself for being so weak. With quick, jerky movements, she turned on the faucet. The water was cool against her skin as she splashed her face, trying to wash away the confusion, the fear, the overwhelming feeling of being lost in someone else's life. But when she looked up again, dripping and gasping slightly, nothing had changed. She was still just Lucy. Broken, scared Lucy, trying to understand how to exist in a world that suddenly wanted to help her. Lucy sat in the window seat, her forehead pressed against the cool glass. Outside, autumn leaves danced across the sidewalk as a young mother pushed a stroller, talking softly to her baby. The woman's face glowed with love as she bent down to adjust her child's blanket. Lucy's fingers twitched against her knee, an unconscious reaching motion that she quickly stilled. The scene felt like a knife in her chest. That could have been her. Should have been her. But the thought terrified her as much as it called to her. She watched the mother's gentle movements, the natural way she cared for her child. Everything Lucy feared she couldn't do. Her own mother had never shown her that kind of love. How could she give something she'd never received? Owen's footsteps were quiet on the carpet, but Lucy sensed his presence before he sat down beside her. He didn't speak right away, just followed her gaze to the mother and baby outside. The stroller wheels squeaked faintly as they turned the corner. "Do you want to see her?" Owen's voice was soft, careful. Lucy's throat tightened. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty sidewalk, afraid to look at him. "I don't know." The words came out rough, barely above a whisper. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in the ache that threatened to spill over. "She probably doesn't even know I exist," Lucy finally said. The words hurt coming out, but they were true. Her daughter was out there somewhere, being cared for by strangers who could give her everything Lucy couldn't. Owen shifted beside her, and she could feel him choosing his words carefully. "She might not now," he said slowly, "but one day, she will." Lucy's chest tightened at the thought. One day, her daughter would grow up, ask questions. Would she hate Lucy for leaving her? Would she understand why? The window had fogged up from her breath, and Lucy absently drew a small heart in the condensation with her fingertip, then quickly wiped it away. She thought about the note she'd left with her baby. "Please give them a chance I never had." The words haunted her now. Had she really given her daughter a chance? Or had she just repeated the cycle, becoming another mother who walked away? Owen stayed quiet beside her, a steady presence that somehow made it easier to breathe. He didn't push or demand answers. He just sat with her in her pain, letting her work through it. Lucy could hear Ava in the kitchen, the gentle clink of dishes being put away, the sound of normal life continuing while her world felt frozen in place. But maybe that was the point. Life did go on. Things could change. She took a shaky breath and turned away from the window. Where is she now? The question came out before she could stop it, directed at Ava in the other room. It was the first time she'd asked about her daughter since that night at the bridge. The first time she'd allowed herself to wonder about more than just the moment she'd left behind. Lucy sat at the kitchen table, her fingers hovering over the stack of papers that would change everything. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the legal documents that could end her role as a mother before it truly began. Her throat felt tight as she read the words again. Voluntary termination of parental rights. Each word felt heavy, final. The black ink seemed to blur before her eyes. Ava sat across from her, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. She hadn't pushed, hadn't tried to sway Lucy one way or the other. She just watched with careful eyes, present, but giving Lucy space to wrestle with the weight of this moment. Lucy's fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. The social worker's words echoed in her head. Take your time. This isn't a decision to rush. But wasn't that exactly what she'd done when she'd left her baby under that bridge? Rushed away from responsibility, from fear, from the terrifying possibility of failure? Once you sign this, Ava said softly, her voice gentle but firm. It's final. She paused, letting those words sink in. There's no going back. Lucy's chest tightened. No going back, just like her own mother, who'd signed similar papers 18 years ago, washing her hands of Lucy without a second thought. The memory made her grip the pen harder, but something felt different now. The pen felt too heavy in her hand. The signature line stared back at her, blank and waiting, but her hand wouldn't move. She thought of Owen's drawings, the one of her baby so small and precious, the one of herself standing tall and strong, the way he saw her, not as someone broken, but as someone with potential, someone who could choose differently than those who had hurt her. Her breath came in short gasps. Ava reached across the table, not touching her, but close enough that Lucy could feel her presence. Breathe, she reminded her softly. Just breathe. Lucy set the pen down with shaking fingers. The sound of it hitting the table seemed too loud in the quiet kitchen. She stared at the papers, at all the legal language that would sever her connection to her daughter forever. She started, her voice barely a whisper. She swallowed hard and tried again. I don't know if I can do this. Ava didn't move, didn't push. She just sat there steady and present as Lucy's hands trembled against the table's surface. The morning light shifted, casting new shadows across the unsigned papers. Lucy picked up the pen again, held it over the signature line. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background. Outside, a bird called out, sharp and clear. Lucy's fingers tightened around the pen, but she couldn't make herself lower it to the paper. She thought of her daughter, not as the bundle she'd left under the bridge, but as a real person. Someone who might one day ask why. Someone who might want to know her story. Someone who might need to know where she came from. The pen felt like lead in her hand. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to take the easy way out, just like she always had, just like her mother had. But she didn't sign. Not yet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Lucy, Owen, and Ava sat in their parked car. The small white house before them looked ordinary enough. Trimmed lawn, flower boxes in the windows, a welcome mat on the front step. But to Lucy, it might as well have been a fortress. Her fingers dug deeper into the seatbelt strap across her chest. Each breath came quick and shallow, making her head spin. Behind those walls was her daughter, the tiny bundle she'd left under the bridge, the choice she'd been running from. The car's air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. Lucy could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. She stared at the house's front door, trying to imagine walking through it. Her legs felt like lead. Ava watched Lucy through the rearview mirror, her eyes full of understanding. After a long moment, she spoke softly. We don't have to do this today. Her voice was gentle, free of judgment. There's no rush. Lucy's hands clenched into tight fists, her knuckles going white. She wanted to take that offer, to slide back into the safety of avoidance, to run away like she always did. But something kept her rooted to the spot, She did have to do this today, now before she lost her nerve completely. Owen turned in his seat beside her, his presence steady and calm. He placed a hand on her arm, light enough that she could pull away if she wanted to, but firm enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "She's inside," he said simply, those two words carrying all the weight of why they were here. Lucy gave a stiff nod, her throat too tight for words. With trembling fingers, she unclicked her seatbelt. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet car. Every movement felt like moving through water, reaching for the door handle, pushing it open, stepping out onto the sun-warmed pavement. Her legs shook as she stood, and she had to grip the car door to steady herself. The house looked bigger now that she was outside, more real, more frightening. The curtains in the front window shifted slightly. Someone was home, waiting for them, expecting them. Lucy's stomach churned. Ava came around the car, keys jingling softly in her hand. She didn't rush Lucy, didn't try to hurry her along. She just stood there, a quiet pillar of support. Owen climbed out last, his sketchbook tucked under his arm like always. He'd been drawing more lately, pictures of Lucy holding her baby, images of possibility rather than fear. Lucy wondered if he knew how much those sketches meant to her, how they showed her a future she barely dared to imagine. The walk to the front door felt like miles. Each step required conscious effort, like fighting against a strong wind. Lucy's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She followed Ava up the front steps, the wooden boards creaking softly under their feet. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. This was it. Her baby was just on the other side of that door. The daughter she'd left, hoping someone else could give her a better life. The child she'd been too scared to keep. Lucy's hands trembled violently at her sides as she climbed the last step. Everything in her screamed to turn around, to run back to the car, to disappear again. But Owen's quiet presence behind her and Ava's steady strength ahead kept her moving forward. The front door opened to reveal Mrs. Wallace, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, crow's feet crinkling at her eyes as she smiled. Her well-worn cardigan and comfortable slacks spoke of a woman who valued practicality over pretense. Come in," she said softly, stepping aside to let them enter. The house wrapped around them like a warm blanket, modest but inviting, with family photos lining the walls and soft lamplight casting a gentle glow. The scent of fresh laundry mingled with vanilla candles, creating an atmosphere that felt lived in and loved. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, dancing across worn hardwood floors that had witnessed countless footsteps over the years. A clock ticked steadily somewhere in the background, marking each precious second, its rhythm as familiar as a heartbeat in this peaceful home. Lucy's feet seemed to root themselves to the welcome mat. Her fingers trembled as she gripped her worn jacket closer, as if trying to make herself smaller. The short hallway before her felt endless, each family photo on the wall a reminder of the connections she feared she couldn't make. Mrs. Wallace moved ahead, her experienced eyes noting Lucy's hesitation. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone used to navigating delicate situations. "She's just had her afternoon bottle," she explained in hushed tones, leading them toward the living room. "She always sleeps so peacefully after eating, hardly makes a peep." Lucy's breath hitched in her throat as they reached the living room doorway. There, bathed in afternoon sunlight that filtered through gauzy curtains, stood a white wooden bassinet. A soft pink blanket draped over the side, its delicate pattern catching the light, and above it, a small mobile turned slowly, casting dancing shadows of tiny stars and moons across the ceiling. Her hands found the doorframe, gripping it like an anchor in a storm. The world seemed to narrow down to that single point in space, the tiny bundle sleeping soundly just feet away. Lucy's chest felt too tight, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it echoing off the walls. Owen and Ava hung back, creating a protective barrier between Lucy and the rest of the world. Their presence was steady, unwavering, like guardian angels watching over this fragile moment. The silence in the room felt sacred, broken only by the soft, steady breathing of the sleeping infant and the distant ticking of that steadfast clock. Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes, blurring her vision. She blinked rapidly, desperate not to miss a single detail of this precious moment. "She's so small," she whispered, her voice catching on each word like fabric on thorns. The baby's tiny fingers curled slightly in her sleep, and Lucy felt the movement echo in her own heart, as if an invisible thread connected them across the space between. Mrs. Wallace stood quietly to the side, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with gentle understanding. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, thumbs rubbing together in an unconscious gesture of empathy. She'd seen many such moments in her years as a foster mother, but each one still touched her deeply, like watching a flower slowly unfold its petals toward the sun. The baby shifted slightly in her sleep, making a tiny sound, somewhere between a sigh and a murmur, that seemed to fill the entire room. Lucy's grip on the doorframe tightened, her knuckles going white against the painted wood. Everything she'd been running from, everything she'd been afraid of was right there in that bassinet, wrapped in pink and innocence. The afternoon light caught the wisps of dark hair on the baby's head, hair just like Lucy's, a visual echo of their connection. The sight sent fresh tears rolling down her cheeks, leaving glistening trails she didn't bother wiping away. Each drop carried the weight of her fears, her doubts, and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Behind her, Owen reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then pulled back, understanding that this moment belonged to Lucy alone. His artist's eyes captured every detail, storing them away like precious gems. Ava stood perfectly still, her own eyes glistening as she watched the young mother take in the sight of her daughter, her hands clasped tightly together as if in prayer. The clock continued its steady ticking, marking each precious second of this reunion. The vanilla-scented air seemed to hold its breath along with everyone else in the room, waiting to see what Lucy would do next. Even the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams appeared to pause in their eternal waltz. Lucy swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. Her feet felt like lead, but something deeper than fear pulled at her heart, something primal and undeniable. The baby's chest rose and fell with each tiny breath, creating a rhythm that seemed to call to her, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. With trembling fingers, Lucy released her death grip on the doorframe, leaving behind slight indentations where her nails had pressed into the wood. Her legs shook as she shifted her weight forward, like a fawn taking its first steps. The hardwood floor creaked softly under her feet, a gentle encouragement, as she took one hesitant step toward the bassinet, then another, drawn forward by an invisible force stronger than her fear. Lucy stood rooted in place, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold something inside that might break free. The bassinet sat just a few feet away, peaceful and ordinary looking, but to Lucy it might as well have been an ocean apart. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the cream-colored curtains, casting soft shadows across the sleeping baby's face. Her tiny hand twitched in her sleep, fingers curling and uncurling like flower petals in the warm light. The room felt too warm, too close, like the walls were slowly closing in around her. Lucy's chest tightened with each shallow breath, her lungs refusing to fill completely. She could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears, drowning out the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of birds chirping outside. The baby's peaceful breathing seemed to fill the space between them, each tiny exhale a reminder of what she'd walked away from. Mrs. Wallace stepped forward, her movements careful and measured, like someone approaching a frightened animal in the woods. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked, her voice warm and encouraging, holding out her hands as if ready to guide Lucy closer. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and fear. "I can't." Lucy's response came instantly, sharp and brittle as breaking glass. She took half a step backward, bumping into Ava, who stood close behind her like a protective shadow. Her hands trembled visibly now, and she pressed them against her side so hard her knuckles turned white. Owen watched from near the doorway, his face etched with concern, one hand gripping the doorframe. He'd seen Lucy scared before, seen her angry and defensive, but this was different. This wasn't just fear. It was raw pain written across every line of her body, from her rigid shoulders to her trembling lips. Ava's hand found Lucy's shoulder, squeezing gently through the thin fabric of her sweater. She didn't speak, didn't try to convince or persuade. Her touch was steady, grounding, a silent reminder that Lucy wasn't alone in this moment, even if it felt like she was drowning. The baby stirred slightly, making a soft cooing sound in her sleep that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, the sound like a physical blow. She stared at her daughter's face, the tiny nose, the dark eyelashes, the rosebud mouth that looked so much like her own. Everything she'd been trying not to think about for months was right here in front of her, impossible to ignore any longer. "She doesn't know me," Lucy whispered, her voice cracking on the last word like thin ice. The truth of it seemed to physically hurt her, making her curl further into herself, shoulders hunching as if against a cold wind. Mrs. Wallace's face softened with understanding, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of her eyes. "But she could," she said gently, not moving any closer, giving Lucy the space she seemed to desperately need. "There's time." Lucy's fingers dug into her arms, leaving white marks on her skin that would likely bruise later. Her eyes never left the baby's face, but her body remained rigid, frozen in place like a statue. The distance between them, just a few short steps, might as well have been miles of treacherous terrain. The silence in the room grew heavier, more suffocating, broken only by the baby's soft breathing and the distant ticking of the clock marking each passing second. Owen shifted his weight from foot to foot, wanting to help but knowing there was nothing he could say to make this easier. Ava's hand remained steady on Lucy's shoulder, a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions that threatened to pull her under. "I can't," Lucy whispered again, softer this time, defeat coloring every syllable. Her voice trembled like a leaf in the wind, fragile and ready to break. Without warning, she turned sharply, breaking away from Ava's touch as if it burned. Her footsteps were quick and unsteady as she walked out of the room, leaving behind the weight of everything she couldn't face, the sound of her rapid steps echoing down the hallway like a retreat. The morning sun painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold as Owen stepped onto the front porch, his bare feet cold against the wooden boards. The autumn chill made him curl his toes, but he barely noticed the discomfort. Lucy sat on the top step, her shoulders hunched against the crisp autumn air, lost in whatever thoughts had driven her out here before dawn. She hadn't moved since he'd spotted her through his bedroom window 20 minutes ago. She wore one of Ava's old sweaters, the sleeves pulled down over her hands like she was trying to disappear into the fabric. Her dark hair fell in tangles around her face, and deep shadows lined her eyes, testament to another sleepless night. Yesterday's visit to the foster home had left its mark on her. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd returned home, just wandered the house like a ghost. Owen sat down beside her, leaving enough space between them so she wouldn't feel crowded. He'd learned over the past weeks how easily she startled, how quickly she retreated when she felt hemmed in. The morning air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney, familiar scents that usually brought him comfort. A cardinal flitted between the branches of the maple tree in their front yard, its red feathers bright against the pale sky, carrying out its morning ritual. His sketchbook felt heavy in his hands, weighted with purpose and possibility. He'd stayed up late working on this drawing, erasing and redrawing until his fingers ached, trying to get every detail right. Now, watching Lucy's distant expression, the way she seemed to look right through the world around her, he wondered if he was pushing too hard. But something told him she needed this. Needed to see what he saw when he looked at her. Carefully, he opened the sketchbook and pulled out the fresh sketch. The paper still held the slight curl from where it had been bound in the book, crisp and clean in the morning light. He held it out to her without a word, letting the image speak for itself. Lucy's eyes flickered to the drawing, then widened slightly. Recognition and something else, something like longing, crossing her face. Her hands trembled as she took the paper from him, fingers barely touching the edges. In the sketch, she stood tall and confident, cradling her baby girl against her chest, their faces turned toward each other in a moment of pure connection. Her drawn face wore an expression of peace, of belonging, that he'd never seen in real life. It wasn't Lucy as she was now, but Lucy as she could be, as Owen believed she would be, if she could just find the courage to try. She stared at the image for what felt like forever, her fingers ghosting over the pencil lines as if she could absorb the strength of her drawn self through touch. Owen watched as she traced the curve of the baby's cheek, the way her drawn self held the child close, protective and sure. Her breathing had grown shallow, but she couldn't seem to look away from the picture, captivated by this glimpse of a possible future. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet Owen almost missed it, fragile as a spider's web in the morning air. "You really think I can do this?" The question hung in the morning air between them, heavy with doubt and desperate hope. Owen didn't need to think about his answer. He'd known it since the moment he'd found her at the train station, lost and afraid but still fighting. "Yeah," he said simply, with all the certainty his 12 years could muster, pouring every ounce of faith he had into that single word. Lucy exhaled shakily, her eyes still fixed on the drawing. She held it like it was made of glass, like it might shatter if she gripped it too tightly, taking this dream with it. The morning breeze ruffled the edges of the paper, but she kept it steady, refusing to let go. Her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but as if setting down a heavy weight she'd carried for too long. For the first time since yesterday, something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in the wall of fear she'd built around herself. She drew in a deep breath, then whispered, "Maybe." The word carried a tremor, but beneath it lay a thread of steel he'd never heard before. That single word carried more hope than anything else she'd said since Owen had found her. He stayed quiet, letting the moment settle around them like the morning dew on the grass, understanding that sometimes silence said more than words ever could. The cardinal swooped down to the porch railing, tilted its head at them as if in approval, then flew away into the brightening sky. Lucy held the drawing like it was the most fragile thing she owned, but her fingers had stopped trembling. In the growing light of dawn, Owen could see the faintest hint of a smile trying to break through, small and uncertain, but real. Lucy's knuckles were white as she gripped the kitchen counter, her reflection ghostly in the window above the sink. The afternoon sun streamed through, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Behind her, Ava and Owen sat quietly at the kitchen table, patient but present, like anchors in a storm. Owen's latest drawing lay beside her trembling hand, the one showing her cradling her baby. The paper had gotten slightly crumpled from how many times she'd picked it up and set it down again over the past few hours. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking each second of silence. A car drove past outside. Someone's wind chimes tinkled in the distance. Lucy's shoulders rose and fell with each careful breath. "I can't stop thinking about her," Lucy finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to catch in her throat, like she'd been holding them back for too long. Ava nodded, her face gentle but not pushing. "That's because she's yours." The simple truth of those words hung in the air between them. Lucy's fingers curled tighter around the counter's edge. But what if I screw it up? The fear in her voice was raw, uncovered. Her whole body seemed to tremble with it. "What if you don't?" Owen's quiet words cut through her panic like a shaft of sunlight through clouds. He sat perfectly still at the table, his eyes steady on her back. Lucy squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed by the possibility in those 4 simple words. Her chest felt too tight, like her heart was trying to break free. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. The drawing caught her eye again, the version of herself that Owen saw, strong and capable, holding her daughter with sure hands. She stared at it until her vision blurred. Finally, Lucy turned around to face them. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were clear. "I want to see her again." The words came out stronger than she expected, like they'd been waiting inside her all along. Ava straightened in her chair but didn't move, giving Lucy space to own her decision. Owen's face broke into a small, encouraging smile. Lucy took another deep breath, steadier this time. Her hands were still shaking, but now it felt more like anticipation than fear. She looked at the drawing one more time, then back at Owen and Ava. She exhaled deeply and nodded. "Let's go." The simple phrase carried the weight of mountains being moved, of walls coming down, of a future slowly taking shape. It wasn't a promise of forever, not yet, but it was a step forward. And sometimes that's all that matters. The autumn sunlight painted long shadows across Mrs. Wallace's front porch as Lucy stood frozen at the doorstep. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together, pressing them against her stomach to steady herself. Owen and Ava waited quietly behind her, giving her space to move at her own pace. The door opened and Mrs. Wallace's warm smile greeted them. Her eyes met Lucy's, and something in her expression softened, as if she could sense the change in the young mother's demeanor. "Come in," she said gently, stepping aside to welcome them into the cozy living room. The house smelled of fresh laundry and baby powder. Soft classical music played from somewhere in the background, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Lucy's footsteps were hesitant but determined as she followed Mrs. Wallace to where the baby lay in her bassinet. This time her daughter was awake. Tiny fingers gripped a pale yellow blanket, and bright eyes stared up at the mobile hanging above her. Lucy's breath caught in her throat as she watched those little hands move, reaching and grasping at the air. Mrs. Wallace stood beside the bassinet, her voice gentle but encouraging. "Would you like to hold her?" Lucy's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. Her first instinct was to run, to protect herself from the overwhelming emotions threatening to break through. But Owen's drawing flashed in her mind, the image of strength he saw in her. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Here we go," Mrs. Wallace murmured, carefully lifting the baby. "Support her head. There you go." The moment her daughter settled into her arms, Lucy felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. The baby squirmed slightly, making small fussy sounds that made Lucy's heart clench with fear. But then, as if by some ancient instinct, the child settled against her chest, finding comfort in her mother's warmth. Lucy couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They rolled silently down her cheeks as she stared at her daughter's face, the tiny nose, the rosebud mouth, the wispy dark hair that matched her own. The baby's weight in her arms felt both terrifying and right, like finding a missing piece she hadn't known was gone. Owen watched from across the room, his eyes bright with pride. Ava stood beside him, one hand pressed to her mouth, witnessing the moment in reverent silence. Mrs. Wallace busied herself straightening blankets, giving Lucy space to experience this profound moment. The baby made a soft cooing sound, her tiny hand brushing against Lucy's collar. Lucy adjusted her hold slightly, drawing her daughter closer. The movement felt natural, as if her body remembered something her mind had been too afraid to acknowledge. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Hey, baby." The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Owen sat on his favorite spot at the old stone bridge. His sketchbook balanced carefully on his knees while he captured the way the setting sun painted the river in shades of amber and gold. The water moved slowly beneath him, peaceful and constant, just like it had been that day he'd found the baby. He paused his drawing, letting his mind wander back to that moment. It felt like a lifetime ago, though only a few months had passed. The pencil felt comfortable in his hand as he added subtle shadows to the water's surface, making the light dance across his page. A train whistle echoed in the distance, and Owen smiled to himself. Some things never changed. He flipped back through his sketchbook, past drawings of trees and clouds, until he reached the one he'd made of Lucy holding her baby. His heart swelled with pride as he studied the image. He'd drawn it before it was real, before Lucy had found her courage. Now she held her daughter every day, just like in his sketch. The paper rustled as he turned each page, remembering how scared Lucy had been at first, how she'd stood frozen in Mrs. Wallace's doorway, unable to move closer to her own child. But day by day, visit by visit, she'd grown stronger. The fear in her eyes had slowly given way to something else, something like hope. "You still come here?" Owen turned at the familiar voice, his face breaking into a wide grin. Lucy stood at the edge of the bridge, looking different than she had just months ago. Her eyes were clearer now, more certain. But the biggest change was the tiny bundle strapped to her chest in a soft blue carrier. The baby, now officially named Sarah, was sleeping peacefully, her tiny fist curled against her mother's heart. "Looks like you do too," Owen replied, scooting over to make room on his flat rock. Lucy carefully sat down beside him, one hand protectively cradling Sarah's head. "I wanted to show her where it all started," she said quietly. "Where you found her." Owen nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. The bridge had changed from a place of abandonment to something else, a beginning. He watched as Lucy gently stroked Sarah's wispy hair, her touch so natural now, so different from her first terrified attempts to hold her daughter. "I never thanked you properly," Lucy said, her voice soft but steady, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see myself." Owen shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I just drew what I saw." Lucy smiled, looking down at Sarah's peaceful face. "You drew what could be. And somehow, that made it real." The setting sun painted everything in warm golden light, making the moment feel magical. Sarah stirred slightly in her carrier, making tiny baby sounds before settling back to sleep. Lucy's hand never left her daughter's back, that protective touch now as natural as breathing. "Sometimes," Lucy continued, watching the sunlight play on the water, "I still can't believe this is real, that she's really mine, that I get to keep her." Owen opened his sketchbook to a fresh page, his pencil moving almost on its own as he captured the scene. Lucy and Sarah bathed in golden light, peaceful and together, the way it was always meant to be. The sound of another train whistle drifted through the air and Lucy smiled. "Some things never change," she said, echoing Owen's earlier thoughts. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the living room windows, casting a warm glow across Lucy as she sat in the old rocking chair. Her daughter was nestled against her chest, making those tiny sleep sounds that still made Lucy's heart skip. The gentle back-and-forth motion of the chair had become as natural as breathing now. Lucy couldn't help but marvel at how small her daughter's fingers were as they curled around the edge of her blanket. Just weeks ago, she'd been terrified to even touch her. Now, holding her felt like the most natural thing in the world. The baby's breath came in soft, steady puffs against Lucy's neck, and she found herself matching her own breathing to that peaceful rhythm. Owen stood quietly in the doorway, his sketchbook tucked under one arm. He watched them rock together, remembering how different things had been that cold day at the train station. Lucy looked softer now, more present. The sharp edges of fear that had surrounded her were smoothing out day by day. "You're doing it," he said simply, his voice quiet enough not to disturb the baby. Lucy looked up, a small smile playing at her lips as she brushed back the wisps of dark hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yeah, I guess I am." Her voice held a hint of wonder, like she still couldn't quite believe it herself. Owen shifted his weight, pulling his sketchbook out. He flipped through the pages, past recent drawings of Lucy and the baby, past sketches of the bridge, until he found what he was looking for. The first drawing he'd made of Lucy, back when she was still a stranger huddled at the train station. Even then, he'd tried to capture something beyond her fear, a strength she hadn't known she had. "You should keep this," he said, carefully tearing the page from his book and holding it out to her. Lucy took the drawing with her free hand, her eyes scanning over the pencil marks. She saw herself as Owen had seen her, not broken or lost, but waiting to be found. Her throat tightened as she looked at it, remembering how alone she'd felt then. The baby stirred slightly, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. Lucy adjusted the blanket around her, movements that had become second nature now. She looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, then back at the drawing, seeing the distance she'd traveled between those two moments. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Owen. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Owen shrugged, shuffling his feet slightly. "I didn't do anything." Lucy shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You stayed," she whispered, holding her daughter closer. If you enjoyed the story of Owen, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.